This is We've Got Issues, and we're here with Rob, the mayor of Port Moody, for our second time round.
Hello, everybody.
So thanks for being with us.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us a little bit about what has the city done to help people cope with COVID?
Yeah, we've had, first and foremost, I think the biggest one has been how we've approached our taxation. The last couple budgets have been really crisis-minded budgets, ensuring that we delivered the lowest tax rate increase in 21 years. And it's because council recognized, and it was a bumpy road. At first, council sort of said, well, we're going to stay the course. We're going to, continue as status quo. There was outcry, rightly so. I think it was Councillor Milani made a motion to move towards a crisis-minded budget. I thought that was the right move at the beginning, and I'm glad the council came around to that. And we were able to do that without sort of cutting any essential services that folks would rely on. So that's first and foremost. We had a whole rearranging of City Hall. I mean, you walk around here and it doesn't feel like the same place because there's people that are working from home, people that have spread out workstations and stuff. Things that I was told last term and a few years ago are impossible. And now, boom, a week later, a month later, and we're all remote. So that's another one where we were able to keep the lights on at City Hall, keep the operations going even though there was the pandemic and a much bigger threat at the time, right? Because the projections were way worse than what actually happened. The projections were like, we're going to lose, people are going to go offline that are going to be looking after the water systems. We were starting to think regionally of like, what happens if every other person is getting infected or whatever the rates were at the time, the projections. Thankfully, it was much chiller than the projections, because I don't know how we would have done if this was a more substantial virus.
Is there any effects that you can think of that have changed, or is the city basically, even though these adaptations are made to how people work, the city's just chugging along just fine?
Well, there were definitely hiccups earlier on with moving the workforce that's traditionally been office-based and moving folks into their homes to work. One of the side effects that I would think is kind of, it raises an interesting question, is that when you move people to work from home, the expectation is that people are going to be lazier. They're going to wake up later. They're going to be doing the thing where I don't know if this is tracked this way. I know some people are tracked by mouse movements, and I've heard people that, move the mouse every 5 minutes. It looks like you're working. I don't think that's how we don't track it that way at City Hall. It's not that intense. But I'm just saying, you're in the initial, for a lot of people, the stereotype is people are going to be as lazy as possible to be able to get through their workday and deal with their own personal stuff at home. And it turns out it's actually the opposite. People are becoming more productive. They're spending more time at work, at home. And what does that do for burnout? What does that do for quality of life? How can you tell people, hey, relax. You don't need to get back to me on that email at 8:30 p.m. I'm just getting to it at 8:30 p.m. because I don't eat solid food until 2 p.m. on some days. So you have to be able to push back and say the work-life balance has to be there. And so to answer your question about culture, I think one of the good things about this change, I think, is that City Hall has been a little bit more responsive on some small, specific issues that pop up. So for example, push button for crosswalks. Earlier on, the engineering department came back and said, well, what if we nix that? We don't do push button anymore. We set all the main intersections to sort of just go off on a time, put a little sticker up, people don't have to touch it, the transmission rates go down and whatnot. Great, let's get that into motion, let's get that before council, like whatever we have to do to be able to get that stuff done. In those early weeks, it was fast-paced, but that kind of responsiveness, that you would have somebody thinking of pushing the button for the people that are crossing the street. I think that's the level of detail that I strive for.
Sounds like there's been some innovation that's been driven by COVID. Are there some things that you think won't change back? Like you've learned some things that will stay going forward post-COVID?
I hope, okay, I was a germaphobe before COVID, so COVID grossed me out way more than I would say probably the average, any of my friends, and people that I meet in work life as well. I've found myself to be more of a germaphobe. So the idea of going into a restaurant, like I think I've been in 2 or 3 restaurants this whole time, right? And most of those have been running in and running out just for takeout. It's weird to me that people are not more grossed out by that right now. So for our culture, I think some of the things I'm looking forward to are if you have the flu, you can't get on a flight. Or you go in the flu section, I don't know, I don't know, you wall it off or something. Look at this, we've walled our elected representatives with Mythbusters style blast shields apart from each other. This would have been unthinkable before COVID. You know, the first thing I said when we got back to this is as if we couldn't get more divided. Now we're physically divided, and it's tongue in cheek, but like this is a pretty significant statement to be making about sort of where we're at as a society and the lengths we're willing to go to on this crisis.
Yeah, we were going to talk about that. Are you guys aren't back into council here as of yet, even though you have these?
We were back for a while, and then it got, so initially we were meeting in person. People were losing their minds in the background. I wish people could see some of the emails that were flying back and forth, like internally. No, internally. Like from each other, from constituents, like all together, there were those first few weeks, people were losing it. And I think that, you know, in those first, it was really tough to have to say, look, we are being directed to do things by the province. The province has taken away the local government's right to declare a state of emergency because they're taking that on themselves. So that means that number one, we can't be doing certain things, and number two, we really shouldn't be because they're the ones that are taking the emergency management role, right?
Somebody's taking the lead.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, we can't be in the way. So when we have a province that says we are not yet declaring a state of emergency, but we're very, you know, this is obviously on our radar, to cancel council meetings when we have a province that hasn't declared a state of emergency, it takes a certain amount of, it takes a steady hand on the wheel to not be completely washed in the sort of, you know, up and down of the day-to-day, hour-by-hour movements of how the room is feeling at that particular moment. And so we were able to say, okay, well, look, once there's a state of emergency declared, sure, we're going to go remote, we're going to go electronic, we're going to cancel, sure. But until then, we got to make sure that the business is done. And then we did that. A couple days later, we had the province declare a state of emergency, and we went offline. And we did that for a while until we were able to come back in this sort of hybrid mode. Folks are in person, but we're also on Zoom for folks who don't feel comfortable to come in. That, I think, is the ultimate solution. Metro Vancouver's been doing it this whole time. It works great. You can waltz into the boardroom. It's empty. Or if you're not feeling comfortable, then you don't. You sign in from Zoom. Everyone's on the same page. Everyone's on the same level. And I think that's what we're going to be moving to in the next couple months now that Dr. Henry's lifting a lot of restrictions and starting to move us towards post-pandemic, which she says is going to be summer, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. So, just really quickly with regards to that last statement you made, do you find it different if you're all in the same room versus on Zoom?
Big time. It's hard to put into words. A lot of people who don't have boardroom experience, I would have probably had the same thought if you asked me in 2013. You know, what's the difference? You can just do all this stuff on Zoom. But on Zoom, you get this. Whatever this camera is looking at, you get this frame. Is somebody standing off to the corner feeding me lines? You don't know. Are you Are you reading something pre-prepared, or are you speaking from the heart? And at council, it's pretty obvious. And I've done both, and there's reasons to do both. Like sometimes you have a big issue, you have 5 minutes, you want to summarize your thoughts, say it passionately, get it out there. Perfectly legitimate reason to be reading. But then there's also the sort of like, okay, so there's the body language cues, people texting each other and all that stuff, the Zoom chat, people's texting about each other in a group chat that they don't realize everybody's in. That's a fun one. You know somebody out there knows who I'm talking about. But that kind of stuff goes on where it isn't the same. And I think that we are going to be a lot better off when we're back in session.
Okay, so with that difference that you notice in a council meeting, difference between Zoom and in person, how do you think that's affecting your staff?
Yeah. Well, first off, I think that that's a conversation to have with them directly. It's a really good one because I touched base with the city manager around, is this possible? Is this desirable? Sometimes you got to do stuff even though nobody wants to, like nobody wants to show up for a late meeting, but work needs to get done. Or for staff, I don't envy the role of staff, especially with a council that is as lively as ours, shall I say. There's a lot of times where we have a meeting that goes on and it goes late into the night, as it always has. The Tri-City News likes to pretend like this is the first term ever that council meetings are going on so late. It's like, no. Last term we were going till like 1 a.m. as well. It's nothing new. But then you have our staff sitting there, and city staff are there to listen to every word that comes out of council, to write things down, take notes, make sure that the reports reflect what was going on. And then you get to a certain point, and we have to extend the meeting. We're seconds away from a resolution on the last item on the agenda. Everybody's ready to just, we've had this discussion, it's ready to go, and then boom, one person decides, oh, it's not going my way. Vote against extending, meeting's over, everyone goes home. Staff are there, or delegates, members of the public who are there to have their item considered, are sitting there going, well, what the hell? I just sat through 5 hours of this super boring meeting, because for them, they don't care about anything else except for their item, right? And then it just kind of ends.
So it takes one person to say no, and it shuts it down? Okay.
It's, I think we go for 3-hour meetings, 3-hour meetings, and then after that you got to extend. So obviously that opens the door to gamesmanship. But sometimes folks are just tired, and it's, I don't know. We have free coffee at City Hall. I don't know what else to say. I mean, I've so many, and it's easy to say, well, you're the mayor now, and you're sort of putting these agendas together, and I don't know. Last term, I would have never even considered voting to not extend a meeting. Like I don't know. It's frustrating. It's frustrating when you're trying to move things along. It would be. I was even. Yeah. I don't want to get on that too long.
Port Moody approved a climate action plan, and we recently learned that it's going to cost the city about $4.2 million to implement this plan over the next 2 years. And I think you have some council members who are very enthusiastic, saying that this is something that cannot wait, needs to be done. And then there's others who are saying not quite so enthusiastic and wanting to hold back a little bit. I was wondering if you could just start maybe by telling us, why does Port Moody need a climate action plan?
Everybody needs a climate action plan. Everybody from low-lying regions like Richmond. You want to look globally to Miami. You want to look at other parts of the third world that are probably going to get hit the hardest by the climate crisis. Indonesia. There's countries that are going to not exist. We've had the first couple sovereign land purchases that have happened since the Alaskan purchase of, I don't know what date that was. But so this is a global issue that is hitting home here in Port Moody. So we are looking at least I'm focused on two things. Number one is, what can we do to reduce our impact on the planet? And then number two, how do we mitigate the damage that is coming from the failures of the past couple generations of leaders, politicians, in actually addressing this? And so it's going to be a really expensive plan. I have yet to hear anybody who's not concerned about both the price tag and the issue. But I don't think there's anyone on our council that I've heard of yet. Maybe they'll come out publicly and say that they're not supportive of moving on climate. The only issue is how do we do that, and how do we do that the most cost effectively.
Are there considerations or thoughts being given to maybe partnering or going in with other areas, even within the Tri-Cities, to share some of these costs and maybe find some efficiencies in the way that we deal with climate?
Yeah, I mean,
crisis?
there's a lot of discussion around certainly what senior levels of government are going to be doing, because locally, you know, there's two sides to this. First is what we can control ourselves with motions of council. Like we could make a motion to electrify our whole fleet. What does that do for the climate? You know, the comment I made at one of our council meetings was it really doesn't matter what we do here. We're not going to be changing the sea level. So that's a perspective that people have that they use to maybe justify certain things that they try to do, whether it's fly more or wipe out old growth forests. It's kind of like, oh, whatever. Well, no matter what we do, it's not going to change it. Is it valid? Literally, it's true. Like Port Moody's very small, so we have to be mindful of that. But at the same time, the second way that we can impact this is with policy. So policy in terms of our buildings. How are the developments that are built today and tomorrow going to at least be kind of close to neutral on the environment? And we are very, I would say, as a country, we're kind of slow to get there. A lot of our industries are sort of no change. Kind of like our discussion around COVID, right? Like the massive changes that we saw in our society as a result of the COVID crisis. We shut down the economy. Okay. At a certain point, it gets to the point where shut it down because we need to focus on the crisis. The climate crisis is not getting the same kind of attention.
And I think some people have said that we should be treating it like a war or like COVID, where we take immediate action and huge steps now.
Yeah. And the interesting thing that we're seeing now out of COVID is the money press, the printing press in Ottawa and in Washington and across the world. They're running at full steam. Looking at it and hearing one bill that's almost $2 trillion seems kind of crazy. And then you sort of look at it and say, well, okay, how does that work? You print the money up front, it's free, and then there's the inflationary impacts that happen later on. Why can't that be leveraged for the climate crisis? And so that now when we take that macro picture and try to bring it back locally, this $4 million plan, how much of it is going to have a real tangible impact? What are the real reductions in GHGs that are going to come out of this? And can we get to those reductions cheaper or easier in other ways? Because we know we're going to have to do that. And we see carbon engineering up in sea to sky country doing exactly that. They pull CO2 from the air, convert it into a fuel, then you burn the fuel, it goes back into the air, and so the atmosphere is sort of used as this sort of repository of carbon that you can throw carbon up there as long as you pick it up and turn it back into something. And obviously then the conversation is around pulling that carbon and putting it away so it can never be used again. How does that get funded? Why isn't that being funded through our carbon taxes? You know, a carbon tax, what's the point of collecting it if you're just going to give it back and lose some through the bureaucratic inefficiencies? Why don't you get that carbon tax and pay for carbon sequestration? That is something I would be very interested in, and it also would take the wind out of the sails of these folks that say that, you know, climate is just an excuse to impose socialism and take us away from, you know, all the kooky stuff that you hear about the climate crisis. If we were to use those sort of free market levers of sure, put it up in the atmosphere, but you have to pay to get it back down. You have to put the whole price of whatever you're producing or manufacturing, so that sure, the cost of doing something may get more expensive, but at least that money is going towards pulling it out of the atmosphere and getting us to a break-even point.
And getting to the point where we incorporate the environmental costs into the actual cost of whatever the product or the consumer good is that comes out of it. As far as
On that, if I could real quick,
sure.
the idea of the amount of carbon that is put up there and pulled back down or whatever, the carbon repository, that needs to be considered at the same level of intensity as people that are concerned around the national debt. The fiscal conservatives should be up in arms about the climate crisis, because you are literally doing the same thing.
Right. No, we're building up like an environmental debt to the future generations, and we've been doing that for many, many years. As far as the climate action plan in Port Moody, can you tell us a little bit about some of the initiatives that can be taken at a municipal level, and some of them that are maybe underway already?
Those would be the actual things you're doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so that's kind of where, in my mind, that goes into two branches. The climate action plan, I think, is focused quite heavily on the policy, so requiring certain things of builders, making sure that the foreshore areas in Port Moody are sort of top of mind when we're doing any kind of development. Retrofitting existing buildings like this one. This is City Hall, built in the 90s. What would it cost to retrofit it? Those are sort of the conversations that are starting now. But as this process moves along, that's, I think, when we will get a little bit clearer picture of what is possible and what is worth it. In other words, is it worth completely redoing City Hall at a cost of, I would guess, we spent $19 million because this is a leaky condo. So what does it cost to retrofit a building for energy efficiency? I would assume it would be way more than that. Is that worth it? How many carbon credits could you get with that amount of money? Could you literally buy that carbon out of the sky and put it underground somewhere? And could we have a bigger impact on the environment and then just keep heating it until its end of life? Those are the conversations that I want to start having as we start to get to implementing, because we have high-level vision, we have high-level possibilities, and I think the next step is to bring them down into very tangible, like, what does this mean for GHGs? What does this mean for dollar per GHG? And compare that to other options that exist. And then I think that...
Sort of do a cost analysis to see where you're best. So for buildings that already exist, maybe it does or does not make sense to do the retrofitting. How about new developments and new buildings? Will there be requirements there to have them implement some of the strategies going forward?
I cannot speak on behalf of council for anything that we haven't voted on yet.
Okay.
This is a plan that I think is going to go through the several cycles before we kind of get a final version. But I would be surprised if there would not be additional requirements on new buildings. That seems like a no-brainer to me. Whatever we're able to do, obviously municipalities have limits. And to the point about retrofitting, I think the only way it doesn't make sense is if there's that alternate, an alternate that's cheaper, that gets bigger bang for your buck climate-wise. When you compare it to the Site C dam, how many billions is that? You're thinking it's going to be like $20 billion by the end of the day. How many buildings could you retrofit for $20 billion? So that's when I think when you get into the senior levels of government, you get a little bit less nuance, and it kind of becomes more obvious where some of those dollars could be better spent, especially talking from a bigger pool. But then again, I'm sure that's what every MLA and every premier thought before they got into that seat.
Things seem to not be so simple once you're actually in that decision-making role. But yeah, Site C is a whole other issue. I think
for that?
Yeah, actually, yes.
Yeah. It would be awesome to listen to a community perspective on things like Site C and what it'll mean to communities. So while I've been listening, this one thing keeps going in my head, and I don't know if it's within the boundaries of the conversation we want to have. So if you don't want to talk about it, that's fine. But what I want to know is, like, why is there even a gap still? Like, why is there anything holding us back to what causes that gap that stops us from going full speed ahead? Because I mean, we look at Trans Mountain, which is not far from here, and let's not kid ourselves. We know that that's not viable, yet it's continuing to go forward. What is keeping whatever powers that be on the same path? And I don't know if you want to talk about
No, I am happy to talk about that. The amount of influence that industry has over our government institutions is unfreaking believable.
So you think it's a corporate?
Well, the oil
issue?
lobby.
When you talk, lobbyists, like, oh my God. People are really, it's funny because when you get into the system at even the local level, you are immediately attacked by a barrage of lobbyists and special interest groups, primarily from the corporate sector, who will offer you things and who will be will give you a shoulder to cry on, try to pretend to be your friends, stuff that you hear, and then be your enemies as soon as you step over the wrong line. Like this is, so that's there too. People seem to, this is a really interesting, it fascinated me ever since I got involved. Before I got involved, people would be telling me, oh, I bet that it's so dirty in government and in politics. And then you get elected, you take a look at the scene, and my review of our state of affairs, from my own perspective, seeing what happens regionally, provincially, being able to scale what I have seen locally to what, I watch the news differently now because I see how much of the media coverage could be manufactured, how people could be threatened, how alliances are built or fail based on how votes go and interests align. So when I bring that to people and I say, yeah, it's actually frightening how much more influence industry has than people have. It takes so much more effort by average people to show up and get the needle moved the tiniest bit away from the corporate interest than it does for the corporate interest to come in and completely redline the needle toward the corporate interest. That to me is fascinating, and it's really it's depressing to see when that kind of feedback is given, and it's like, hey, I've been in the system, and it's not that great, not the best system we can do. I think jury duty, treating legislators like jury duty would probably get better results overall. That's my...
Treating legislators.
Yeah, you got your 7 seats, and you've got your 35,000 people, and you pull a random name. You get a computer to pull a random name for 7 seats.
Showing up for legislative duty.
Do it like jury duty. I think that would be way better. Oh, yeah. Yeah, big time.
Well, you'd definitely get a wider diversity of input, I guess.
Yeah, and I don't get me wrong. I don't think by any means society's ready for that. I don't think that we're ready to give ourselves our own power. But I do think that in the case of like, I don't know, like we're talking about what to do with the Senate federally. That was a big question last election. Yeah. Turn it into jury duty. It's can't get worse than what it is now.
But what I think, what I'm trying to get at is, you're thinking of that as a solution, because we were talking about lobbyists, and you were saying how much easier it is for a lobbyist to have access, which I often liken it to. People should consider that lobbyists do have that much more power. When they come through the doors, they're being paid to come and see you.
They have the resources to back them.
So every minute that they sit waiting to speak to you, they're getting paid. But the public, when they come to, they get an opportunity twice a month to come in, and they have to sit for 4 hours for you guys to finish your business before they get a couple of minutes to talk to you and have a
Just
conversation.
one tiny example. That's just a tiny drop in the bucket of how insanely rigged the overall system is against the average person, in my opinion.
Yeah, and then and so this is where I was trying to get to. You mentioned that maybe if we had people picked randomly to do the legislative work, or to do the work of a city council, maybe that would be a way to fix that. Which, like, I'm not absolutely sure about that, because I know personally how hard it is to catch up on exactly how the work is done. It would take people a while to catch up. Are there any other solutions to that instead of going to that extreme thing? What do you think is a solution to lobbyists?
Well, money out of politics would be great. We got quite a bit of progress last municipal election. Corporations were officially forbidden from donating to politicians. To me, hearing me say that out loud sounds like it's weird to say that. We just banned politicians from being paid by corporations, kinda, to run their campaigns. Obvious red flag there. And then, it's now limited to $1,000 or $1,200 per person. What's stopping Company A from
Doling out the money to their, yeah.
It's kind of like, where do you, yeah.
So we still might have problems in that process.
Yes, undoubtedly. I don't know this to be a fact, but I would be surprised if that weren't, if there weren't workarounds that people do. It would, yeah. So I don't know. It's one of those things that I think it would be much better off handled the way that we used to have elections, where the party would get paid per vote from a pool of funds, right? You would get publicly funded elections. And so then the question comes, well, how much is this going to cost? Well, what is an open democracy worth to you? How many pennies on your tax bill is that worth to have an institution you can believe in that you know is not going to be funded by all this shady money?
Shouldn't we be throwing that conversation, that objection, shouldn't we just be throwing that out the door when all of a sudden we can find an extra $6 billion for a dam just like that?
Sure.
Without even going into the pros or cons of a dam. We've now set a world where we can, if we want to do something, we can find $6 billion.
Or $2 trillion. Look at the U.S., right? When there's a crisis, we now have living proof, living memory, not just the memories of the veterans that we hear about World War II and how the whole world sprung into action. I never saw that. I never saw a world spring into action. I never even imagined something like that to be possible until COVID hit. And then again, it's like we shut down the economy. How many times have we shut down the economy? And so that, I guess, ropes back to your question about climate action. At what point is, like, how much is too much, and why is it so hard to move this needle? It's David and Goliath out there. And, the amount of flack that you receive for proposing one minor change as opposed to a large change, when there's actual money on the table, that you're making your decisions that is going to cost one group of people millions of dollars, but to the whole of society, you're going to be creating a market improvement. Burt Flynn Park Road, that's a 355 acres of second growth forest, cutting it in half with the road, benefits a very, very small number of people. And it dramatically changes the landscape of the city. It ruins that one park, obviously. And it also sort of feeds into that decades-old vision and plan of pushing humanity further in the footprint, that urban containment boundary, pushing it further and further out when we absolutely don't have to. And we've proven that we don't have to.
And as a single constituent, when you're faced with that, it can be really frustrating trying to get your voice heard in those sorts of situations. So, do you have any advice for constituents how they can be better heard by their local governments?
Organize, don't lie, and by don't lie, I mean don't blow things out of proportion. Make focus on your individual cases. Focus on what you're trying to accomplish. Write them down so you don't forget. Because I've seen cases in certain jurisdictions where a group of people are trying to accomplish task A, and then they get put into this weird process by the governing body, and next thing you know, they're all confused as to the direction they're heading. And then sort of just be persistent and have a bit of patience, I think, is the key, and be willing to work with people that don't nitpick, I would say, is probably the third piece of advice. Is like focus on your strategic sort of objectives. You want to save a park. How do you do that? Plan it out and do it. And don't listen to people who's like, I heard some of the funniest stuff last election was around this Burt Flint Park issue, and how I'm trying to do a regime change at City Hall, and it's like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm trying to do. It's called an election. They call it regime change when it's not voting. It's like, how much more transparent can you be than running for the top office, right? It's just funny. Don't let haters get you down.
We talked a little tiny. We mentioned trees, and I'd like to know what you have to say about that. Trees and old growth.
Yeah, I think, where do you start on old growth in BC? It is. It's such a complicated. Well, actually, I won't say it's complicated. In my view, it's pretty cut and dry. Imagine going to the governor of California, showing up at Gavin Newsom's office and saying, "Hey, I got this great idea. I want to buy your redwood forests that you make millions of dollars a year on tourism. Probably, I would guess, more than that on the spin-off industries. And we want to turn them into roof shingles and pellets and send them off to Florida for roofing. Because, Mr. Governor, these high-quality trees will last up to 30 years on a roof as opposed to 20. And that is worth your redwood forest." You would get laughed out of the room. You'd get absolutely laughed out of the room for even suggesting an idea as insane and diabolical as taking a 1,000-year-old tree and turning it into a goddamn shingle. And I think it is such an unbelievable shame that we are sitting on the last few percent of untouched ground on the surface of the planet. As a species, we've had a scorched earth policy ever since we left Africa. Europe has been cut down. Asia's been cut down. We get around to, there's some nature preserves in Japan, and then you've got the West Coast. That's it. There's nowhere else to jump to. There's no magic new continent. Mars doesn't have any new trees for us. And so when I see a situation like what we see at Fairy Creek down by Port Renfrew, one of the last places where it just hasn't been touched, and you also have 97% of the rest of the province that you could go log, and to think that those trees are somehow worth something as pathetic as a shingle. I don't even know where to start the conversation. And this goes back to our conversation earlier around the incredible power of industry. Because if you look at some of the stats coming out as like 70-something% of the government's own donors, the donors to the NDP, the ruling party in British Columbia, 70% of them when they were polled during the last election said, "I would have never donated if I knew that the current state of affairs is that it's just chill. It's chill to wipe out a forest like that." The last couple percent, again, remember 97% is fine. Like, it shouldn't be fine. There should be major reforms on forestry practices. We currently treat trees like they're corn. Like you plant them, they grow, you cut them, you plant new
They're harvestable crop.
ones. When in reality, it's actually a system. And we have some of the most advanced and cutting edge researchers on this stuff at UBC, government-funded institution, coming up with some of the most amazing science in the world, saying that if you actually treat it as a system, this isn't some hippy-dippy stuff. This is like you, instead of treating it like corn, you realize that what's on the surface is only what is on the surface, and the majority of the forest is actually underground. And that's where most of the stuff happens. And so if you do selective logging, overall, you will get more lumber. You will get more roof shingles.
And leave those mother trees there.
Yeah, and you pick them off and you do them individually. But that's not even the conversation we're having. The conversation we're having now is, should we decimate the next cut block of irreplaceable forest that no other jurisdiction on earth would be stupid enough to let happen? That's where we're at. Should we cut the next section of old growth forest?
And it started off so, I think, optimistic, thinking that we were going to save this old growth, and that was sort of the appetite that was out there and what we were led to believe in quite a few cases. And then to have this happen is really disappointing.
Well, we're not, I'm not there yet. I have faith that we will be able to see some kind of positive outcome.
I hope so.
I really hope so, because there's no other way to get around this.
What would that positive outcome look like? Because I believe that the old growth was going to be saved a number of years ago. I have the memory. I'm older than you. I have the memory of years ago, us people going out into the woods and fighting, standing in front of bulldozers, standing in front of crews. Right now, we're down to, as you described it, the last 3%. What if they do save that, or if they just say, "Yeah, we're going to stop now. We're going to stop now," but then a new government's going to come in. I'm starting to be very callous about this, and I'm going like, that's gone. It's already gone.
This is what David Suzuki was talking about when he was during, I think it was the second Harper term or something like that, where he said the biggest failure of the environmental movement is thinking that when you get a win, that it's a win forever, and that instead this is, he was sort of looking at the Blue Dot movement and trying to make some constitutional amendment so that it goes above law and it's enshrined there.
Right to a healthy environment.
Totally. And so,
if I may, it's going to have to be something that's enshrined in law. Because if we go back to lobbyists and how lobbyists are paid by their industries, they will always get paid. They charge a premium on the product you buy so that they have money to lobby. But those of us who have protested about things, we're doing it for free every time.
At a cost to you.
At a cost to us personally. And we'll always have to do that. And I don't think people think about that. So it's going to have to be what you said, in law.
I think the biggest issue here that we're seeing right now is whether or not the industry lobbying will outweigh the BC Chamber of Commerce, who's waded into this debate in 2016, based on the chamber in Port Renfrew opposing what's going on there. First Nations reconciliation. Has that just been hot air out of the government's mouth? We're about to find out. Mm-hmm. Climate action, of course, that doesn't need any introduction. And then the government's own old growth review panel or whatever that has their 14
and
recommendations.
Industry too.
And a lot of industry that are saying,
huge.
A lot of folks, this is fascinating, a lot of loggers that come there to some of these blockades there near Port Renfrew say, I don't care what I'm cutting. I'd rather actually not even cut this. What does it matter to me? The company's the one that's making slightly more dollars per acre, which is in itself kind of a laughable concept. And again, go to California, try to get those redwoods. Try to buy the California redwoods. I think it's either that or isn't 97% enough? That's what I want to see on a billboard somewhere. And going back to the industry, if this was the other way around and it was on the industry side, that would be on a billboard somewhere.
That's true.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And I think too that a lot of our our lumber and our unprocessed wood, like logs, raw logs and stuff, going offshore. We saw a lot of it going to China with their big building boom, and so that's another area that we have to really look at, building that infrastructure. We go back to that infrastructure again. We have no infrastructure left in BC. The sawmills shut down, the secondary manufacturing. There's very little of that now. So if we were to keep more of our own wood in BC and manufacture it and process it rather than shipping off just vessels full of raw logs constantly, it's incredible what was going there.
Yeah. And but it's again important to remember how microscopic this old growth issue is.
The
now.
old growth is a little bit different.
It's coming down. It's down to the
Yeah.
point where there are sections of industry that are on board. Board of Trade and BC Chamber of Commerce has something to say about it. Indigenous, climate, and again the government's own political supporters, the people as a whole in general are not down for old growth logging. And again, we're not talking about logging. We're talking about old growth logging.
When you look at Great Bear Rainforest, like, you can put in those complex sort of mechanisms to deal with that. It's really hard and it takes a lot of commitment from a lot of people, but it can be done. And it shouldn't be hard. I mean, for old.
It's hard. So I'm cautiously optimistic. This is kind of where I come down on this, is we have an opportunity now. Premier Horgan has an opportunity right now. It's a slow pitch. It's a slow pitch that's real easy to just knock right out of the park. And the industry can keep thriving, doing stuff to the 97% of the province. And the First Nations could get a signal that, hey, maybe there is a hope for reconciliation here, that it's not always going to be white-dominated, industry-dominated, money-dominated, and that the local communities that are affected there can build an economy for tomorrow. Port Renfrew is now City of Trees or whatever. They have a tagline. It's all about the big trees. And that's where the real money is the tourism dollars, the stuff that you don't need to cut it down and make it disappear for the money to show up. You could keep milking that economic cow, so to speak, for generations.
It's like the trophy hunting with grizzly bears. Like, they're worth more alive than they are dead. So same kind of thing, do the ecotourism and promote that. And I guess
It's been a big issue. It's a big issue for local governments. We've spoken out about this at UBCM a number of times. And I feel like it's coming to a head. And I don't know, I feel like the government couldn't possibly do a Wet'suwet'en round 2, War in the Woods round 2, Idle No More blockades across Canada, and then I think that they're smarter than that, and I'm really hopeful that we'll see some kind of a moratorium until we can get those recommendations put in place. I'm certainly going to be bringing it to Port Moody Council to try to get some action that way, to get some advocacy work done.
And hats off to the folks at Fairy Creek that are on the front line fighting so hard. They've really fought a good battle on that.
I want to know about your, I don't think we've ever asked this question before, and it's funny that it's me that's asking it, not Nancy, about your tree. Do you have a tree bylaw? Do you have a tree policy?
Yes, we do.
Can you talk about that for a bit? And why is that important, and should they be expanded, or are you at the right level now?
Always could be expanded. I'm a big believer in the fact that our footprints are as big as they need to be. In many ways, they're bigger.
The city footprint.
Everything from carbon to physical footprint on the land. You know, I'm on the regional planning committee at Metro Vancouver, so a lot of the work there is to take a look at Metro Vancouver as a region, kind of how you look at it from Cypress Mountain, and you see the whole region laid out, and you see the land use stuff that's going on.
So regional growth strategy.
Exactly. The Metro 2050, how that's going to look going forward, and how the local governments play into that with their policies and OCPs and stuff. So I think one of the biggest issues for tree retention in Port Moody is going to be development and how that's done. So we have policies in terms of, if you have to remove a tree, you got to get a permit for it. You got to do your tree replacement program, and it's good, right? Like, number of trees is theoretically supposed to go up over time.
But
That's
also
really good.
recognizing that if you take down a mature tree,
Yeah,
you can't replace it with a,
Doesn't compare.
yeah.
It doesn't compare because, again, whether you're looking at mushrooms or trees, what's on the surface is just sort of the fruit of it. Most of the work is going underground. It's like if you looked like this, if you were buried underground and then people thought that this was the whole body, it's like actually it turns out that the roots do a lot of the work and the networks and whatnot for forestry. But here, I think our biggest challenge, and we've seen City Council in Port Moody take a pretty strong position in favor of trees. A couple developments have come through where there were trees that were, let's say, removed in unexplained circumstances or something like that. I don't know what the legal term would be for something like that, but where council sort of went, no, not good enough. This is too sketchy.
So this is where trees didn't have, there were no permits issued to take down those trees, and
There were developments where trees disappeared, and everyone's like, "Whoa, there used to be trees here." And so then,
When a large tree is taken out, a mature, healthy tree is taken out, what's your replacement value? And like, because it's doing X amount of work for the environment, what do you guys do to replace that?
it's a ratio. It's like usually a 2-for-1, but there is, as far as I know, I would be surprised if there's a municipality in the province, maybe even the country, that goes to that depth of how much work does a tree do. I think currently government does not really recognize on a policy basis. Like, people get that, the councillors get that, like politicians understand these things, scientists obviously know this stuff, but as far as the policy is concerned, a tree is a tree, and that's it. So that's
somewhere where an urban forestry management plan or something where it could be written in there.
Yeah, so we're working on urban forestry. We're working on kind of related, the wildfire interface. That's another big one for Port Moody. You know, Belcarra gets their water from an undersea pipe that comes in from Deep Cove. No one really knows about that. It's how do you, and so that you can fight fires for only a certain amount of time. Mayor Belenky, former Mayor Belenky, resigned over that issue because there just wasn't enough action done, and he had a really strong opinion on that, and he couldn't take it anymore because not enough action was being done. So we have there's a lot of tree related issues, both locally and of course provincially, that we could wade into, and I appreciate you asking because this is a big one.
It's near and dear to our hearts, that
Absolutely.
subject.
So I would like to, I think I will take you up on talking about trees again in the future.
sure.
It's as Nancy says, it's a near and dear subject. Unfortunately, we run out of time because we did want to get into the development thing. Sorry,
Totally.
we are very off script. It's
We
mostly me though. I take responsibility for that. Nancy's much better with the questions.
I appreciate that.
Thank you for taking the time with us today, and we hopefully it won't be as long before
Absolutely.
next time we come and see.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was
Absolutely.
really good
And-
conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks
Yeah.
for doing this. This is
Absolutely.
excellent.
Thank you guys.